After trying and failing to bring 4 separate pieces of gun control legislation to the floor of the Senate on Monday, the reports are that a bipartisan proposal might be in the offing towards the end of this week, proposed by GOP centrist Susan Collins, which indicates that finally the GOP may be getting rid of the shackles of the NRA, may be getting rid of those fetters that prevent them from making a sensible decision. This is what Chris Murphy, who was part of, or who conducted the filibuster earlier, had to say on this. He said, "I think you're seeing in real time the vice grip of the NRA loosening in this place. This is a watershed moment, whether this gets to the finish line or not. You have Republicans scrambling to try to find a way to remedy their no votes Monday night." Now, the proposal that has been brought by Susan Collins, the details are still emerging, and it's, as I said, it's not been actually proposed yet, so we're going on reports, but it is reported that it looks to block people on 2 separate terrorist watch lists. It is narrower in scope than that was proposed by Feinstein earlier on, but nevertheless, those legislation or that measure would have prevented or would have flagged at least the Orlando shooter when he made the purchase of guns. So it is a movement in that direction. But the bigger piece of news, regardless of the specifics of whether we think it's going to be effective or not, the bigger piece of news is that it seems to indicate a shift of away, potentially, from that tight fettering of the NRA has.
I'm going to remain skeptical until I see what the actual details are here. Of course, they're trying to save their hides. And I wouldn't be surprised to find some Trojan horse in here, which puts in some piece of legislation that Democrats wouldn't want in there, and that they're trying to slide it in as a compromise. So I'm going to maintain my enthusiasm, or going to hold my enthusiasm until we find out.
Susan Collins is one of the most moderate centrist Republicans from Maine, no less. She doesn't represent a trend. She's always had a pretty consistent anti-gun rhetoric to her. She's not indicative of a change or a policy shift. If you look at the key leaders of the Republican Senate majority, like Mitch McConnell, the NRA is one of the most powerful lobbies on Capitol Hill. She doesn't represent a movement, not to burst that. She just doesn't.
So there's been reportedly been a lot of support for, notwithstanding that, there's been reportedly a lot of support for it, and with senators coalescing around the proposal. But to the point is the fact that Democrats and Republicans, it's just the politicization of this, it's so distasteful. And it demonstrates the gridlock nature when you have John Cornyn, who is the GOP whip, saying this. He said, Senator Schumer and Senator Reid are discouraging Democrats from voting for it. This is with the proposed legislation, trying to peel off those who have co-sponsored it because they, I don't believe, really want to come up with a bipartisan solution. They'd just like to keep the issue alive. So there you have it. The other aspect is the fact that there's so much cynicism there, and it's so gridlocked that potentially, even if there was something that was palatable to both sides, the accusation is, and even if there's no merit to it, it's still there's that accusation there which just demonstrates the toxicity that's going on.
That's where I'm skeptical, is that the Republicans would present a bill that had nothing in it that the Democrats would find objectionable. I would have to imagine that they're going to put in something that Democrats are going to object to, that they're going to have to reject, and then trying to turn the game around on them.
And illustrate and just say they are just trying to keep it alive as a political football rather than actually address the situation and the solution. I am encouraged though by some of the philosophy behind it, or perhaps not really philosophy is not the right word, but just the sense of it, the sentiment behind it, that perhaps they are trying to move away. We have to remind ourselves of Margaret's point, the NRA is so strong, it's donated over a course of time $36.2 million in re-election campaigns. Some of the numbers are staggering. John McCain was a recipient of $7.7 million over the course of his Senate career. Mitch McConnell, $1.2 million. It's extensive.
But I just don't see the Republicans suddenly having a kumbaya moment with the Democrats on gun control. I don't see it happening. They've so far gone to the wall to reject any form of gun control. 20 children murdered in a school, and they don't care. They won't do anything to budge. And I just don't see suddenly they're having a come to Jesus moment here about it. I don't see it happening.
They are 2 balls to the wall. You mentioned John Cornyn. Texas senator, very staunch advocate, a surrogate of the NRA, if I'm not mistaken, and I believe he's also on the NRA money list. I'd have to check it, but I think
Sure.
that's true.
No, he received $57,000. I mean, you're right to the point. Susan Collins, a centrist, has received $18,000. So, it is a pay-to-play game.
All Congress people and senators receive money from the NRA to a lesser or greater extent. It's more a matter of whether or not they get the grade, whether or not the NRA will actually put money in a campaign against them. That's what they're trying to avoid.
Right, and it's also the ability to galvanize their supporters because they are so vocal and they're so active. Again, I've quoted it a number of times. The NRA also supposedly rather sick jokes stands for never re-elected again. And if you go against the NRA, the idea is that you will never, because, as I said, they're so active. And this is what the NRA had to say about its spokesperson. Unfortunately, Senator Collins and others are focusing their efforts on unconstitutional proposals that would not have prevented the Orlando terrorist attack. The American people want Congress to stop playing politics and pass policies that will keep them safe from terrorists. Well, again, I mean, that's what we would come to expect. Clearly, their answer to preventing the Orlando terrorist attack is to arm up, is the good guy with the gun, that myth that we've talked about and had to, it's just a myth that they perpetuate and they don't want to address. There is no one, listen, there isn't, to be, not to be fair, but to be direct, there is no one solution. There is no one piece of legislation that's going to prevent attacks like Orlando. We've seen that. It's so deeply nuanced, it's so deeply layered. But gun control, it's so disingenuous, it's so mendacious of the NRA to suggest that this is not what people want. It's one critical piece of the puzzle in going towards making society a safer place would be to pass this gun legislation, and one hopes that Senate Republicans can at last start to relieve themselves of the fetters of the NRA.